Now at 84 years old, Paul McCartney is finally opening up. And what he's saying has shocked fans around the world. It's not the story we thought we knew. It's deeper. It's darker. And it's incredibly emotional. For years, people assumed George Harrison's death was all about cancer. But what Paul is revealing now, after all this time, tells a different story. One about pain, pressure, betrayal, and a silent heartbreak that very few people knew George was carrying. George Harrison died on November 29, 2001. The official cause of death was lung cancer. That's what was on the news, in the headlines, and in the public eye. But those who were close to him knew there was more going on behind the scenes. Now, for the first time, Paul McCartney is peeling back the curtain. Not to sell a story, not to stir controversy, but because the truth, according to him, deserves to be heard. Paul says it clearly: George didn't just die of cancer. There were other things that killed him long before that. And when you listen to him talk, you can feel the emotion in his voice. This isn't just about a bandmate. This is about a brother, a soul connection, a wound that never really healed. To understand what Paul means, we have to go back to the early days of the Beatles. George was the youngest, just 15 when he started playing with John Lennon and Paul McCartney. While the other two were louder and more confident, George was quieter, more thoughtful. He wasn't just shy, he was observant. Paul remembers those early days clearly. The long nights in Hamburg, the cramped hotel rooms, the endless touring. George was the one who would stay up writing or reading about India, about meditation, about life beyond the spotlight. And while John and Paul were chasing hits, George was chasing something else, something deeper. Even in the height of Beatlemania, George never seemed to fully enjoy the chaos. The screaming fans, the pressure, the media attention, it all felt heavy for him. Fame was not something he craved. In fact, it made him uncomfortable. He was searching for peace, for purpose, for something beyond the noise. That search would later take him to India, to the sitar, to spiritual teachers like Ravi Shankar and Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. But back then, as a young man in a rising rock band, he didn't have the space to be who he really was. George always felt like the outsider in his own band. And it wasn't just his imagination. Paul admits now that he and John dominated the creative space. They were the main songwriting duo. Most of the album tracks were Lennon-McCartney compositions. George often had to fight just to get one or two songs on each record, no matter how brilliant they were. Think about this: George Harrison wrote Something, a song Frank Sinatra called one of the greatest love songs ever written. He wrote Here Comes the Sun, one of the most beloved Beatles tracks of all time. And yet, during the band's peak, his contributions were sometimes treated as afterthoughts. That hurt him deeply. Paul says, "I look back now and realize we didn't listen enough." George had so much to say, but we didn't always let him say it. That pain stayed with George. Even after the Beatles broke up, even after the solo albums and the success of All Things Must Pass, he still felt like he had to prove himself, to be taken seriously, not just as the quiet Beatle, but as a true artist. And the more he tried to find peace, the more the world seemed to pull him back into conflict. In the late 70s and 80s, George often stepped away from music altogether. He focused on gardening. He spent time with his son Donnie. He produced films through his company, Handmade Films. But no matter how far he tried to run from the spotlight, it always found him. Whether it was legal battles, business disputes, or media drama, peace was always just out of reach. Then, in 1999, something terrifying happened. George was attacked in his own home by an intruder. He was stabbed multiple times and came very close to dying. Many people don't realize just how serious it was. The knife pierced his lung and nearly reached his heart. His wife, Olivia, saved his life by fighting off the attacker with a lamp and a fireplace poker. Paul says that after that night, George was never the same. He became more withdrawn, more fragile. The cancer was already there, but the attack shattered something deeper: his sense of safety, his trust in the world. Paul believes that the emotional damage from that night contributed to George's decline more than anything else. He never really came back from that, Paul says quietly. His body healed a bit, but his spirit, I don't think it did. But even before the attack, George had been fighting battles no one saw. Paul reveals that George often felt used by the industry, by the media, even by people around him. He gave so much and yet so often felt unappreciated. George was a giver, Paul says. He gave love. He gave wisdom. He gave music. But not everyone gave it back. And then there was the cancer. It began in the throat, spread to the lungs, then to the brain. George fought it quietly. No big announcements. No public drama. Just silent strength. He didn't want pity. He wanted peace. Paul remembers visiting George near the end. They sat together, laughed, cried a little. But mostly, they just existed in the same space. Two old friends, brothers, bonded by music and memories. I told him I loved him, Paul says. And he told me he loved me too. That meant everything. But it's what Paul has finally decided to say now that's catching everyone's attention. He's saying that while cancer may have ended George's life physically, it wasn't the only thing that broke him. It was a lifetime of emotional strain. The silence, the inner pain, the feeling of being misunderstood. And Paul isn't pointing fingers. He's not blaming anyone, but he's being honest, maybe for the first time. It's a powerful thing for Paul to admit, especially at 84. After all the fame, the awards, the legacy, what stays with him most is the pain of losing George and the guilt of not seeing it sooner. Paul has also shared that George's deep belief in spiritual healing and Eastern philosophy helped guide him through the last years. Even while his body was failing, George kept his soul focused on peace. He believed in life beyond death, in energy and karma. And that belief gave him comfort, even when the cancer got worse. But Paul now says something heartbreaking. George died with a broken heart, not because of love lost, but because of a world that didn't understand him. That sentence has stuck with fans, because we often celebrate George for his music, his mysticism, his calm energy, but we rarely talk about how much he carried inside. The weight of being seen as the third Beatle, the pressure to stay quiet, the struggle to be heard. Paul has also revealed that one of George's final wishes was for people to remember him not just for his Beatles years, but for the message he tried to share: love, peace, simplicity. That's why Paul feels it's so important to speak now, to honor that wish, to share the real story, the human side, not the headlines, but the heart. At 84, Paul is looking back at a full life. But when he talks about George, it's clear that some wounds never close. He smiles when he remembers George's laugh. He tears up when he talks about their last moments. And he speaks with deep respect when he says George was the soul of the Beatles. This isn't just a story about death. It's a story about friendship, about missed chances, about the things we don't say until it's too late. Paul's honesty now is a reminder that behind every legend is a human being, fragile, flawed, and quietly struggling. So what really killed George Harrison? Yes, it was cancer. But according to Paul McCartney, it was also years of emotional pain, spiritual exhaustion, and the silent weight of a world that never fully saw him. And now, more than 20 years later, Paul is making sure that George is finally seen, not just as the quiet Beatle, but as a man who gave everything and asked only for peace in return. George Harrison, a legend, a seeker, a soul who deserved better. And now, through Paul's words, maybe he's finally getting the love he always gave to the world. Thank you for watching Golden McCartney. If this story moved you, share it with someone who loves the Beatles. Let George's light continue to shine. Because as Paul says, all things must pass. But love always stays.